Hello, how's it going? You're muted.
Yeah, I just realized that. All right. Hello, everybody.
How's everyone doing today?
I'm sorry, what?
How's everybody doing today?
So I am doing really well. I have had a day where I've been glued in front of my computer doing Zoom stuff because there was a science fiction convention that I was attending virtually today. I wasn't presenting at this one. I was just attending. And then I just got off about a half hour ago of a call with the Royal Manticoran Navy, which is the David Weber fan organization, as Pat and some of the rest of you know. And they do a social call amongst their membership, and they invited me to join in. And so I got a chance to hang out with them for an hour or so. And that was a lot of fun. So, but it's been a long but very, very fun day. How about you, Pat? What have you been up to?
Well, woke up this morning, did Navy stuff till about somewhere afternoon, and then did a little preparation for tonight. And then I learned how to play a game called War Room, which is a World War II game. And then since about 3 o'clock, I've been playing that up until about 4 minutes ago. And then I'll return to that. So it's been a long day, but mostly, all but the first half was fun.
So what country are you playing?
United States.
Okay. So for those who don't know about War Room is the magnum opus by a guy named Larry Harris, whose previous game design credit that he's most known for is Axis and Allies.
Oh, he did Axis and Allies?
Yeah, he's the dude for Axis and Allies.
Oh.
Which means he's like perhaps the designer of the most successful war game of all time, but it's totally different than all other war games, right? Most hardcore board war gamers of the SPI, Avalon Hill, Game Designers Workshop ilk wouldn't even really consider Axis and Allies to be a war game, right? It's like saying Risk is a war game, right? But one of the things that I've learned is that the people at like places like Hasbro and stuff like that, they're serious hardcore gamers. They just have a different set of victory conditions for what their game has to do. Mm-hmm. And, but a lot of them place the sort of stuff that it wouldn't surprise me to hear that they play games with 1,000 counters on their off time. Just like apparently I read somewhere that Barry Manilow's backup band consisted entirely of wannabe jazz musicians. Mm-hmm. So whenever they would just like had some free time, they just do like freeform jazz stuff. Okay. Not necessarily the thing you'd think of for Barry Manilow. But right. So in any event, Larry Harris designs this game War Room. I was one of the Kickstarter backers. I think I was a Kickstarter backer, or maybe I got it right afterwards when you could still order the stuff. But no, I think I backed it on Kickstarter because there was a fairly long period of time between when I ordered it and when I got it. And I got it at the expansion also. So $240 for the base game, $120 for the expansion, for a grand total plus $40 shipping, mm-hmm. for a grand total of $400 for that game.
Yeah, so far it's a very interesting game. Totally different than Axis and Allies. It's like he was bugged by the things he didn't,
that he had to do.
All the hallmarks of a game in which it sort of fixes or changes all the things that were a little more in depth that he wished he could have done, and still managed to do it in a pretty seamless way. It's not that complicated of a game, so it's slow, and you pre-plot your movements and stuff. But so far in my version, or in our version of the Pacific War, Guadalcanal was a diversionary move for a big fleet battle in the Marianas, which the United States won. So the question is whether this diverts the big Japanese invasion force that's possibly heading to Australia, because it pinned a giant Japanese invasion force. So we'll see how it goes. more to follow next week on the results.
I bought it. Like one of the things about this game is that the map. One of the things you get in the expansion is a larger map. The map is a giant circular map. It's basically it's a polar projection, but weird. It's got this Salvador Dali aspect that you can actually see beyond the equator, despite the fact it's a polar projection. So the map that comes with it is actually a circle, if I remember correctly. The map that you get, the bigger neoprene map that you get as part of the expansion, is not a circle. It's a square with a circle on it. And it's 48 inches on a side, so it's like a 48-inch diameter circle. I have a table that this would exactly fit. And so, but you'd have to have other tables set up for all the other stuff. But they put it on a square. So at some point, I'm going to have to, when I get my new place, I'm going to have to put it out with some cutting boards underneath and carefully cut it out so that I actually get a circle.
Yeah,
I've decided my life will not be worth living if I don't do that.
You and I should play that on Tabletop Sim sometime, because
we should.
You can play it bit by bit. We can play it over 6 months, but it looks like a fascinating game. So I've played 2 turns in 6 hours, so it's not speedy.
Yeah, I've had games like that too. So, well, I mean, you've played Federation and Empire, right?
Yeah, and that's an even slower game.
Have you ever played it through to completion?
Nobody has played it through to completion.
Well, okay, let me ask that question again. Have you ever played it through to resolution?
No, not even that.
Okay.
So so for those of you who don't know, Federation and Empire is the Starfleet universe, from Starfleet battles and stuff, and that's the big strategic game where you play the Federation, the Klingons, the Romulans, Gorns, Tholians, Orions, Zinti, Lyran, ISC, or Andromedans. I used to see people at gaming conventions. For the whole 5-day convention, they have a group of people. They have multiple people playing each race. So the race is being played 24 hours a day, or the game is being played 24 hours a day by people who know what they're doing. They take the first 3, the first 2 days is just putting the counters on the map, and playing 24 hours a day with multiple people in a tag team. They never finish it. So I'm not aware. Let me change this. I'm not aware of anyone who's ever finished a game. I don't believe they ever finished a game at the conventions I was present for. So it's a fascinating and interesting game. You just have to play it on a smaller scale if you want to resolve a small piece. So
there was the old SPI game, Campaign for North Africa, which had a godzillion counters, like several thousand counters. The joke was that and it may actually be true, I think I heard this from people at SPI, that the only people that they think had ever played it to completion were a couple of guys who were in prison.
and the planet.
Yeah.
The first test of that war game was between 1939 and 1945. Because I believe you did the calculation that you played it out and you realized you were playing it out in real time, essentially.
Yeah, we were playing Decision Games War in Europe, and we were playing, somebody said, how long is this going to take? We've been playing this game forever and we haven't even gotten to Pearl Harbor yet. How long is this game going to take? And when we did the math, it's like, okay, every time we play once a month, every time we play, we get in 2 turns. Every turn is about 2 weeks. Oh my God, we're playing World War II in real time.
Yeah.
And which we all simultaneously failed our morale rolls.
Jim Westbrook made the comment. He hasn't heard of anybody finishing it either for Federation and Empire. And someone else just played all the published Star Trek games. By far, his favorite was the FASA system.
I really like the FASA game. I've got a story to tell about that in a second.
That was my first one. And I played it religiously for a really long time. I even still have all the books on that bookshelf back there. Then when I got introduced to Starfleet Battles, that kind of became my favorite one at that point. Let's see here. And but once Federation Commander came out, that became my favorite game because it cut out a lot of the rules and stuff like that, which allowed you to bring more ships, which means you could play out a multi-ship battle in which added enough strategic or tactical complexity to the game that I found it to be ultimately more interesting. So anyways, Federation Commander was my favorite for a really long time. Diplomacy.
I've only played Diplomacy once.
I played Diplomacy in high school. We had a computer hot seat version of Diplomacy we would play on the computer with some friends, and we had a lot of fun with that. But
I've heard good things about it. I was introduced to Diplomacy by a bunch of people that knew how to play it really well, and one guy was setting me up for a fall, and the rest of them let him do it, which is exactly the wrong way to introduce a new player to a game, right?
Exactly.
I have absolutely, the first time I play a game, I expect that I'm going to, somebody's going to beat me like a rented mule. I'm okay with that. But this was just something I didn't know what I was doing, and I wandered in. It's like falling prey to fool's mate in chess, because you're playing chess against somebody who's way better than you, and they've just decided that they're going to go for the cheap victory as opposed to like actually teaching you something.
Yeah.
So I walked away from Diplomacy and never looked back.
They're going to club the baby seal.
Yeah. And I
see some people talking about Harpoon. Yes, I used to play that in college. We had a group called the Dead Admiral Society in ROTC and Navy ROTC in college. The biggest, we played it religiously, and we got charts from the actual official naval charts and stuff, and we'd use those in the Adriatic or along the Norwegian coast or North Atlantic, all that kind of stuff. The biggest one we did was a carrier battle group and a surface action group, escorting an amphibious group up to reinforce Iceland, with regiments of backfire bombers coming after them and submarines and all that kind of stuff. So that was our big game, and that lasted 6 or 7 months. It was a lot of fun.
So what Pat knows, but the rest of the world probably doesn't. Actually, let me answer a real quick question first. So Stephen Ross, you asked about Star Trek Adventures. We haven't started playing yet, so we have no opinion of it yet, but so far so good. So back to Harpoon. The main designer of Harpoon, the original designer of Harpoon, is a guy named Larry Bond, who had played in a similar game that was done by a naval officer named Neil Byrne, who is a hoot. He's long retired now, but there's somebody out there wandering around with no personality because Neil went back for a second helping. But it was a classified game. It was one that he actually did for the Navy, and it was a classified game. And Larry sort of thought it would be useful to have an unclassed version of that game, and so he came up with a game. And so he started corresponding with this young naval ROTC. I think he was an ROTC at the time, by a guy by the name of Chris Carlson, who is now the co-designer of Harpoon. I mean, he and Larry have written novels together. They've designed Harpoon. They've been business partners and fast friends, et cetera, for 40 years now, something like that. As close to 40 years as to make no difference. I mentioned that he was a naval ROTC officer. He happened to be from the Minneapolis area, which is where Pat is from. In fact, Pat, do you want to conclude? I've set you up.
Yeah, he lives here on the other side of town from me. So, but with COVID, haven't had a chance to see Chris in a long time. We want to, I'd like to get together with lunch with him or something like that. Hi, Chris.
That's not where I was going with that. That's not where I was going with that.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Where I was going was same naval ROTC unit.
Oh, yeah.
As Pat Doyle.
Yes, same ROTC.
And Chris is now working with that unit again. And Pat was asking questions like, is there still the big mural over on the one wall over the such and such? And Chris goes, yeah, it's still there. And he goes, I painted that mural. So
yeah,
which is really cool.
Yeah, I happened to be walking through the university a couple weeks ago with my sons, and we just happened to wander into the armory, and yeah, all the stuff I painted as a midshipman, as a senior midshipman, or as an ensign, is they still use it for decoration in there. So I've left my legacy on the world. I can die now. That's the monument to my existence.
That's cool. That's cool. So Chris is Chris hired me for my last job.
Hey, Chris, he's here.
Oh, he is?
Yes, he is.
Where do you see him posting or something?
Yeah, on the comments. He's the comment at 9:16 p.m.
I don't have time.
There, see?
Oh, he's here. Let me turn timestamps on. Is he on? Oh, he's on Facebook. That's what's going on. He's on Facebook. I've got. I'm doing this through YouTube. I'm looking at the YouTube chat.
Okay, sounds good.
Now I understand. I thought I was going crazy. Chris hired me for a job. Chris and I have known each other for a long time, and he did some work for us when I was up at the Naval War College. And then at one point he called me up and said, hey, we could use a naval analyst but I'd have to create the billet. Would you be interested in applying for that job if I created the billet? And I said, sure, no problem. That was in like January. And then he calls up like at the beginning of September and says, the job posts on Monday. And I said, that's great, Chris. What are you talking about? Because I had totally forgotten this. Totally forgotten it. He said, remember back in January? It's like, oh, okay, yeah. So he basically was doing his best to find his replacement because he knew that he was leaving. He was going to. The office was getting moved from the D.C. area down to Charlottesville, Virginia, and he wasn't going to make the move. And so he was trying to make sure they had a naval analyst. And so I ended up working there for 9 years, and that was a fantastic job, and got to do a bunch of really, really, really cool things. And it was wonderful. It was everything that working at the Naval War College wasn't. So
tonight, everybody, we've got we're going to continue the talk about the Enterprise and Captain Kirk's battles that we started last week, and looks like we'll probably get a couple more. I think we'll get 2 more talks out of it, and that should take us all the way to Star Trek 6. Eventually. So we'll do 3 more. We'll do 3 more battles today. And at some point, let's see here. I can pull up I can share my screen if you're ready. Chris, you all set?
I don't think there's anything I have to do.
No, there isn't. I just wanted to make sure you.
Oh yeah. Go for it. I'm actually going through comments.
Okay, sounds
good. Which works.
All right. Well, let me get this all fired up here. And share my screen. Sharing screen with 2 monitors. Share that one. Okay. So last week we talked about, just to recap of last week we talked about the Kobayashi Maru. And since we're kind of talking about Kirk, his leadership, and sort of the tactics and tricks that he uses in battles, and we're basically going through all the battles that the Enterprise engaged in during the 5-year mission and through the movies. Not really doing books. The goal is not really to do a lot of retconning. We'll treat each each individual episode as correct and not worry about whatever technical inconsistencies there might be too much.
Psst,
So,
Pat.
yes.
Psst, hit the hide button.
Hit the what?
The hide button next to stop sharing. There's the hide button.
Oh, yep. Sorry, that was blocked by my other.
Don't hit stop sharing. Hit the hide button next other side.
Yep, I did.
There we go.
Okay, everybody good now? All right. So, we talked about the Kobayashi Maru. Kirk is a young cadet. How he reprogrammed the simulator, and we just talked a little bit. You can watch last week's episode if you missed it. Talked about just different aspects of the Kobayashi Maru and training and that sort of thing. Then we talked about and kind of trying to go through in chronological stardate order of the different engagements that he got into. And we go to the Corbomite maneuver because it's a battle he managed to bluff his way out of. And I think that's an important part of who Kirk is and how he deals with battles. So we kind of talked about that part of it. But then we got to the Balance of Terror and we went through that. And of course, that is Captain Kirk's first known battle as captain of the Enterprise. And if he was in command of a smaller other ship, prior to the Enterprise, there's no canon information for it. So, but today we're going to talk about the Arena, Errand of Mercy, and the Doomsday Machine. And each of these situations, so in each of the previous situations, we got to see Kirk on the bridge of the Enterprise, and he was in control of the situation and directing the battle. But in these next three episodes that we talk about, we're going to see the Enterprise engage in battles where Kirk's not on board the Enterprise. So really what this goes to is we'll be able to evaluate how Kirk did as a leader in preparing his crew for when he's not around, which could certainly happen, especially when your captain always leads the away party, and then something bad happens during that. But it kind of goes to his leadership and his preparation, and clearly, off screen, we assume the crew of the Enterprise in between episodes is training and running drills and simulations and all that kind of stuff to stay sharp on emergency situations. So based on how things go during these episodes, we can sort of infer how Kirk did. So in the first episode that we're going to talk about is the Arena. And so this is the episode where Kirk fights the Gorn, see in the lower left-hand corner there. So it starts off with the Enterprise is lured to Cestus 3. And as they get aboard, they're planning to go have a nice meal with the out down on the base or on the colony. And he's actually told to bring a lot of his tactical team. So apparently a lot of the tactics guys wear blue shirts also. So little does the landing party know that they're beaming down into a trap. Cestus 3's pretty much been obliterated by a ship in orbit and clearly by some ground forces. In the vicinity of the colony. So as they beam down, sorry about that. So as they beam down, Kirk's on the ground and they immediately start taking fire. They're getting some shelling. Sulu has been left in command of the Enterprise while he's down. And the Enterprise is attacked by another alien ship that they're not aware, or that both they weren't aware of. So clearly it must have been hiding on the other side of the planet when they got into orbit. And that's most likely the ship that attacked the colony. So Sulu fires back. He engages the Gorn ship. And meanwhile, while the battle's going on in orbit, Kirk and his landing party has taken fire. There's apparently some shelling, maybe mortar, some form of 23rd century mortars are hitting. But as Kirk's on the ground, he laments the fact that he's not on board the Enterprise, and he obviously feels pretty bad about it. But one interesting thing that Spock says is that he says that Sulu is a experienced combat officer. So I don't know where Sulu got all of his experience because we've only seen him on the Enterprise. He was helming the ship during during Balance of Terror. So it's possible that in Sulu's record, he probably was engaged in a few more battles somewhere on another ship before he got to the Enterprise. We can only guess at that. But Spock clearly states that Sulu's an experienced combat officer. So he is probably the right person on the bridge of the Enterprise to take over or to be conning the Enterprise at this point. So Enterprise fires phasers, and Kirk's kind of dodging shells and ground fire while giving Sulu a few orders too. Kirk finally orders Sulu to arm the photon torpedoes and try those. And the Enterprise's weapons prove ineffective against the enemy ship because they have shields as well. So could be that they weren't in real close for decisive engagement, and the weapons fire was ineffective, didn't penetrate the Gorn shields. So the ship could very well have been the equal of the Enterprise or something very close to it. After Sulu's attack proves ineffective, Sulu decides to take the Enterprise out of orbit, probably where he can maneuver a little bit better and protect the ship a little bit better. So back on the ground, Kirk finds a grenade launcher and launches at the Gorn ground forces, and they either withdraw or they are killed. As a result, so that means the Gorn ship ends up leaving orbit. So that means the Gorn ship either beamed up the survivors or decided, like, hey, all our ground forces are dead. We might as well leave. We've done enough damage. Either way, the Gorn ship leaves. So Sulu detects this, swings back around, picks up the landing party, and they go off to pursue the Gorn ship. And this is one of the episodes where we actually see photon torpedoes being armed and fired in the show. So, and the ones I watched are the remastered version for this. So we very clearly see nice red photon torpedoes being fired by the Enterprise in this one. So I'm not going. So our focus is pretty much on space combat. So I'm not really going into the hand-to-hand combat as much, or the details. Oops, sorry, I keep moving my mouse there. Okay, so we see Kirk's resourcefulness, though, on the ground. We know Kirk is a really resourceful person, and as we talked about last week, he was described at the Academy as a stack of books with legs. So I think they were implying he studied harder than most people, and sounds like certain midshipmen gave him a lot of grief for it. So, but when you learn a lot about you learn a lot of things about a bunch of different subjects, you can bring that information into play at key points. So I think that the fact that Kirk was able to fashion a small cannon and create some gunpowder, I think that's a sign of his early hard work and preparation. He didn't just guess how to make gunpowder, and it wasn't like there was gunpowder just sitting there on the planet, but it did have all the elements to make it. So he would have only known how from earlier study of chemistry and even history. The fact that he knew enough history to know what they used to create weapons back then. So the more you know, the more you can get ideas from other areas of knowledge. And I believe this also is another contrast. And sometimes I'm going to contrast the Kirk we see played by William Shatner against J.J. Abrams' Captain Kirk, who is just sort of this know-it-all genius. Everything comes naturally, doesn't have to work for it, which, is not what I believe to be is a great message.
Please, can I interrupt you for a brief sidebar? So when I was like in 8th grade, 7th grade, something like that, one of the kids a year behind me had gone to the library and found a book that had the recipe for black powder in it. And started making black powder and selling it to the neighborhood.
That's awesome.
What finally finally happened was there was a circle of kids. I mean, they lived off a standard suburbia side street sort of deal, and the sort of place where you could actually play in the street because there just wasn't that much car traffic, except during beginning and end of the day. And so some night one of the parents looks out and they see that there's a bunch of kids in a circle out in the middle of the street, and what they're doing is they're burning holes in the concrete with black powder. and so
in here. What?
They're burning holes in the concrete with black powder, and so whatever parent it is goes out there and goes, "What are you doing?" And they sort of explain what's going on. It's like, "Where did you get that?" And they all point at Brett, and so that's how Brett was very briefly in the black powder cells business.
Actually, that also reminds me of another quick story. My dad, as a kid, was very interested in chemistry, and he learned how to make gunpowder or black powder. And he was out in the backyard. There was a little creek that ran through the end of his backyard, so he was down there, kind of in the creek, and he had sort of buried a little bomb, big firecracker he tried to set off, and and he had just gotten ready to set it off when he got called in for dinner. And it hadn't gone off. So he ran up for dinner, and they were sitting out on the screened porch in the backyard. And then suddenly it exploded, and they had dirt and grass and rocks and stuff landing and hitting the house and everything like that. So apparently he made a fairly big one.
Yeah. I mean, I knew kids that used to buy ST's model rocket engines and repurpose them as bombs.
Yeah. There you go.
That gave you all the parts. But in any event, I felt it was important you don't have to be Jim Kirk to figure out how to make black powder.
Correct. But I have to say, if I were trapped on a planet with a Gorn right now, I probably could not make black powder. So
I could remember some of the ingredients, but I have to play around a little bit to get the proportions right.
Yeah. But my dad told me this story when we were watching this episode when I was a kid. So, and he even, I believe, pointed out, the ingredient that they left out.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that they left something out, because one of the things that they used to do in the old MacGyver TV show.
Yeah. They always left one thing out.
They always left one thing out. Everything else would work, but they'd always leave one thing out if it was anything even remotely dangerous.
Yeah. Yep. So that's pretty much it for that. We all know the end. Obviously, Kirk wins the battle with the Gorn and decides not to kill the Gorn. The Metron pops out, and this Metron seems very much like a Q, as far as I can tell. It seems to have the powers of a Q. But anyways, the Metron lets the Enterprise go, and they all lived happily ever after from there.
So I'm glad that you had the one image there, because it made me. I realized there's one of my favorite Star Trek photos. I did not realize what it was from, and it's from this episode. So I'm going to share the screen real briefly, I think.
Okay.
Let's see. Let's do that.
Is this the Ensign Ricky, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy beam down?
Yes, it is. Let me make it big for those who haven't seen it.
Yeah, I did look for that particular slide because I was going to open with that, but I couldn't quite find a good copy of it.
So are you guys all seeing it?
I probably would have to unshare. So we'll show it afterwards. How's that?
That'll work.
All right.
Back to you.
Okay. So the next episode where the Enterprise engages in battle is Errand of Mercy. And in Errand of Mercy, the show opens with the Enterprise getting a message that war is expected with the Klingons. Or it opens with them discussing possible war with the Klingons. And then the war warning order message arrives, and Kirk and Spock makes the comment how interesting it is how you humans always seem to get that which you do not want. And Kirk, he basically just accepts it. He was like, all right, we're at war. He accepts it, and he clearly shows some determination to complete their mission to deny Organia to the Klingons. And I think this is another thing. He very clearly takes ownership of the mission. He is now determined to accomplish the mission assigned to him by the admirals. But shortly thereafter, the Enterprise is attacked by what I can only assume to be a Klingon scout. The Enterprise is hit, and if you hear listen in the background, you can hear they're saying the Enterprise is being hit with magnetic pulses. And the Enterprise gets hit just shortly after the deflectors automatically pop on. So somehow this Klingon ship took the Enterprise by surprise. Maybe it popped out of warp and had been hiding behind something. Maybe the Enterprise wasn't paying attention. Maybe subspace is a little bit weird, like sonar in the underwater environment, and maybe there are places and ways to hide or get up and sneak up on somebody. So we just don't know for certain. Either way, this Klingon ship gets the first few shots in and attacks the Enterprise. So, and on a technical note, we never actually see magnetic pulses used again in the franchise, I believe. I'd have to go back and watch everything just to be 100% sure, but this is the only one I remember. And if you play the Star Trek Attack Wing game, you can equip your ships with magnetic pulses. So they're actually in there as a heavy weapon. So I could probably retcon this really quickly and just say it's either perhaps some form of experimental weapon that the Klingons have, or it's maybe a different setting on their disruptor weapons. And so it's a tactical option that might have some tactical advantages in certain situations. So either way, the Enterprise returns fire. And we actually see the same phaser pulses that we saw in Balance of Terror. So some of you know that from Balance of Terror, I kind of have this theory that when Kirk was firing phasers in there, they used sort of the photon torpedo special effect. So it was kind of my opinion that maybe they were photon torpedoes. They just got the writers just did something wrong. But this might make me rethink my theory on that. Or it's possible that the phasers in the old series also have some form of pulse mode as well. So that's a deeper discussion for another day. However, the Enterprise fires several volleys of phasers at the Klingon ship, and my guess is that it is a scout ship and not a full-size D7, because the Enterprise just fires a couple phaser volleys and manages to kill the Klingon ship. So, and the other thing is in this particular case, Kirk doesn't come up with any revolutionary tactics. He doesn't waste time reconfiguring a bunch of things. He basically says, keep on firing, and they keep firing till the enemy ship blows up. So, and the point is that sometimes the right answer is to just shoot back. In Star Trek's always, very frequently in Star Trek, they're always trying to reconfigure and do something excessively clever. If you got the weapons and they're armed, shoot. So sometimes just good old-fashioned brute force will work. Commander Riker could really have learned something here, since in most of the movies we see him always having to do something bizarre rather than just shooting, because he's on a battleship for all practical purposes and can't even take out a scout ship. So anyways, enough about that. So as Kirk beams, so finally after destroying this scout, they get to the planet. They they're getting ready to beam down, but before they beam down, Kirk gives Sulu some marching orders. He says, before heading down to Organia, he says Sulu's first duty is to the ship, not the landing party, and that's a pretty standard thing for Kirk. So that's clearly one of Kirk's characteristics. Kirk says if the Klingons arrive, and Sulu, all eager, interrupts him and says, "We'll handle them, sir." Kirk cuts him off and says, Kirk basically cuts him off and says, "Nope, if the Enterprise is outmatched, you're to leave orbit and come back when the odds are even. So, and again, that's a laudable and consistent thing about Kirk the entire time. He's always trying to protect his ship. However, a Next Generation era captain would probably have taken issue with the fact that Kirk decided to beam down when there's a chance of a Klingon attack coming at any moment. So, but that's not really Kirk's style. And of course, they were little more cowboy diplomacy back then. So, anyways, so part of Kirk telling him to come back when the odds are a little bit more even is simply the fact that Kirk might not believe in the no-win situation, but you should always try to use your superior judgment to avoid having to use your superior tactical skills to save your life. And that's a common aviation saying. Use your superior judgment to avoid having to use your superior piloting skills to save your life. So, avoid the dangerous possible no-win situation whenever you can. And then, so he beams down, discussions with the Organian. He's having discussions with the Organians, and he's trying to convince them to accept Federation help and assistance. And they keep insisting that there is no danger. So when speaking with Aelborn, one of the Organians on the planet, Kirk does refer to himself as a soldier, not as a diplomat after he becomes frustrated. So does he think of himself? Is he thinking of himself as a soldier because now war has been declared and he's switching gears from explorer to soldier? Or does that go towards maybe that part of the 23rd century where Earth or Starfleet really had a little bit more of a military bent to it than it does in the Next Generation era? Because in Star Trek II, we do specifically hear David Marcus refer to Starfleet as the military always taking advantage of science. So anyways, it's an interesting debate to have, and we'll have that in greater detail sometime. So the other thing is Kirk offers a primitive culture technological assistance, but it's a time of war. So is the Prime Directive suspended in a time of war? So I thought that was kind of interesting, and another interesting part when you want to get into the discussion about the Prime Directive. So then shortly thereafter, a fleet of 8 Klingon ships arrives to take Organia. Sulu retreats as ordered.
Just out of curiosity, Pat, how many times in the original series did somebody say that would violate the Prime Directive, and as a result of that, we're not going to do it?
I don't believe that was ever said, was it? To be honest, I don't know. I haven't done the true academic research on that question, but I am kind of interested. It could very well be because of Kirk that captains don't beam down, and they're a little more strict about the Prime Directive in the Next Generation era.
Okay, so I had always heard that they talked about this when Next Generation came out and Jean-Luc Picard didn't go anywhere. The claim was that Roddenberry always thought it made sense for the captain to stay on the ship for exactly the reasons why it makes sense for the captain to stay on the ship. And so they never talked about away teams, but he really sort of had that as his impression going in. And the network apparently, according to the story, the network didn't like that. The network's response to that was, what are you talking about? You got Kirk, you got the beefcake, he goes down, he gets a shirt ripped, he kisses the green chick. Well, you know what? Why would you have him stay on the ship, right? And so basically the network overruled him on that. I don't know if that's true or not. And I can't remember what the source was for it, but it, I could see it as being true because it's clearly kind of silly for the captain to go down all the time. That having been said, you might conclude that if you're dealing with the Organians and you're trying to impress upon them the seriousness of the situation, they might be more impressed with the 05 as opposed to like the ensign.
Or the 06 in this particular case.
Well, no, I think he's an 05.
Kirk?
Yeah.
No, he's a captain.
He's a commanding officer. believe his actual rank. So I want to say towards the end of the series, Spock gets promoted from lieutenant commander to commander. But I think Kirk during this time period was actually most of this time period he was an 05.
I don't think so. I think that I'm sure they referred to Spock at one point as a lieutenant commander, but at other times they referred to him specifically as a commander.
Yeah, he got promoted, and I think what's my source for that?
Plus,
I think my source for that is actually the making of Star Trek.
Okay, yeah, no, I think a heavy cruiser command is an 06 command. Because the other thing they talk about is that he's one of the youngest officers to make captain. But understand, for those of you who don't know, captain can be a specific rank, which in the United States Navy is 06, but sometimes it can be a title. Let's say if I, as a lieutenant commander, took command of a minesweeper, I would still be the captain of the ship. So
yeah, and there's a couple of different ranks that you have issues like that with. The other one, of course, being Commodore, which I suspect I have this strange premonition that we're going to talk about Commodores.
And you would be right. Okay, so let's see here. So now we'll move on to the Doomsday Machine. This is another situation where the Enterprise is imperiled in a battle while Kirk is away from his ship. So this time, at least, Spock is in charge. So Sulu got to be in command, and on the previous two. And one thing about Errand of Mercy there, Sulu leaves leaves the ship or leaves the system when the Klingon fleet arrives. Then later on, he returns to the system with a fleet of Federation ships, and they're getting ready to have a fleet battle when the Organians shut off everybody's systems and makes them unusable. So, and that essentially ends the war that the Klingons had hoped for. So, okay, so Doomsday Machine. The Enterprise is in a system. There's a lot of subspace interference and communications interference. They end up coming upon the USS Constellation, as we can see here, badly damaged. Both warp engines are just hopelessly wrecked. The saucer sections is open to space in several different areas. Even kind of looks like the bridge is badly damaged up there too. So, and which makes sense because we see Commodore Decker later on down in auxiliary control. So Kirk and McCoy and Scotty and a damage control team beam aboard and to see what's going on with the ship. And like I said, Kirk might be the reason for Next Generation stipulation the captains stay aboard, like we talked about, just because really, I mean, 3 episodes in a row, the Enterprise is in, or not in a row, but 3 combat situations the Enterprise enters and the captain's not aboard. So that's gotta raise some eyebrows somewhere. So they end up finding Commodore Decker in the auxiliary control room, and he's the only person on board the ship. So, and this is an interesting term. So Commodore it's basically now in the United States Navy, it's just used as a title. And you might have a captain of a ship, and the person who's the Commodore is generally in charge of a squadron of ships. And that's not quite like a fighter squadron. A squadron of ships might be 3 to 4 ships, generally speaking. I'm sure there are exceptions out there. But so the Commodore is the guy who's in charge of that group of destroyers or a group of cruisers. In the United States Navy, we call them Desrons for destroyer squadrons, or crewrons, I guess, or for a cruiser squadron. So and it used to be, and Chris, you want to go into the history of Commodore? you got about we're about 10 minutes till, so we'll be able to be just on time.
Okay, so very briefly, Commodore is one of those ranks that means different things in different navies, and in the U.S. Navy, it's meant different things at different times. In some navies, it's treated as basically the lowest flag officer rank, so it's right below Rear Admiral. Traditionally, it would be a 1-star rank for the rank insignia. The U.S. Navy has gone all over the place with regards to Commodores. Commodores have been and are currently referred to as if a ship captain commands multiple ships, like he has a squadron, like a destroyer squadron commander is often referred to as a Commodore. He's already had his individual ship command, and now he commands multiple ships. He doesn't command a ship anymore. Or if sometimes they will use it as a courtesy title if a senior ship captain is given command of multiple ships. Back in the early 1980s, they actually said, let's go ahead and make it a flag officer rank again. So they made 1-stars Commodores, but you still had Commodore being used for these fleet captains. And so then they decided to call it Commodore Admiral. And they said, no, Commodore, they concluded Commodore Admiral is too complicated. It doesn't roll off the tongue. Instead, we'll call him Rear Admiral Lower Half.
Yeah, because that's so much better.
Yeah, because that's so much better. And so they now say Rear Admiral Lower Half and Rear Admiral Upper Half. And because in my mind, it kind of makes sense for Commodore to be fit in there, but they use Commodore to mean other things. So in this particular case, my impression is that what they use Commodore for is a scene, and this is entirely my impression. I haven't done any research on Memory Alpha or any of the other sites about this. I'm just kind of thinking this. My impression is that they use Commodore as a term to mean a senior fleet captain who's basically this might be his second command, and they do that in order to give him precedence in a situation where they might need to do a multi-ship operation. I think they basically have just pre-designated him as a squadron CO, even if he doesn't actually have a squadron yet. And I want to say there's a couple of other places where you see guys that have the word Commodore. I want to say there's one in the Ultimate Computer where there's
Wesley.
Yeah. And so that it seems to be the case every other time we see a Commodore, he's got multiple ships under his command. Not that there's a whole lot of data points, which tells me that maybe in Decker's case, he would be a senior guy who, if there ever came down to a situation as to who was senior, it's Matt Decker.
Yep.
As witnessed by the fact that he takes over the Enterprise and Kirk kills him for it.
Yes, exactly. It's going to turn out that exposure to Kirk is very bad for the Decker line. So, we'll go into that one. I know I mentioned it to you, but we'll save that for the end and the finale of this whole thing when we come into conclusions about Captain Kirk, and we'll even come up with a conspiracy theory. So, but more on that later. So basically, they take the Constellation in tow, and they're trying to get out of the system. Scotty and Kirk and the team are on board. They're just trying to get the Constellation up and running again, or at the very least, ready to be towed. So, but they see the planet killer start pursuing them, and basically a battle ensues at this point. Enterprise takes some hits, and in addition, there's a battle on the bridge because it's now Spock facing off against Commodore Decker for command of the ship. And by rights and regulations, Commodore Decker, just like Chris said, he's got precedence. He can take over command of the ship. And so he ends up taking the Enterprise. Meanwhile, the Constellation's been cut loose and is off drifting somewhere while Kirk tries to get the thing up and running. Meanwhile, the Enterprise makes several futile attacks and close passes at the planet killer, tries to destroy the Doomsday device or the Doomsday Machine, but it's futile, right? It's made of pure neutronium, weapons can't harm it, and it's really, really big. So they run through the battle, Enterprise takes some damage, and Spock is able to get Commodore Decker on a technicality for trying to commit suicide. And McCoy, of course, is eager to have him relieved of command. So they eventually take him down below. And he gets escorted, Commodore Decker gets escorted down below by a security officer. Commodore Decker ends up stealing a shuttle and steals the shuttle, and he ends up flying the shuttle and going into the Doomsday device. And its power, actually, the strength of its power field gets reduced by ramming that shuttle, that's the small shuttle, into the Doomsday device, which is what gives Kirk his idea. And so him and Spock come up with a plan where Kirk is going to get the Constellation up and running again, just enough. He's going to fly it in and detonate the warp core. And Scotty, of course, agrees. He's like, yeah, it's hard to keep the bloody thing from blowing up, so it should be easy enough. Of course, the transport, for drama, the transporter is not working really well, and they're unsure if Kirk will be able to beam out in time. But Scotty saves the day, gets Kirk on board, and the Constellation gets flown into the Doomsday device, and the warp core breach inside the confined space is enough to wipe out the Doomsday Machine. So in this one, Kirk uses unconventional tactics, and because in this episode, unconventional tactics is all you got. Conventional tactics, we saw Commodore Decker try those, and they didn't work. Just had no effect, no impact. So this makes Kirk, again, he's adaptable, he's resourceful, but he frequently doesn't come up with the idea all by himself. Somebody gives him an idea or says something else, and Kirk makes the connection. So in this particular case, Commodore Decker flies the shuttle in, and it produces a result that damages the Doomsday device. Not quite enough, but it makes Kirk realize, well, we've got a floating bomb in the form of the remains of the USS Constellation. And he comes up with that tactic. Just like we talked about in the Corbomite maneuver, Spock is talking about chess and that they've been checkmated by the big glowing orb from the First Federation. But then he's having an argument with Dr. McCoy. Dr. McCoy gets angry at him and says to Kirk, "I'm not bluffing." And that sparks the idea for Kirk to use poker instead of chess as the model that he's using to come up with tactics to possibly survive the encounter with the first with Balok's ship. So next week, so that pretty much wraps up what we're talking about for today. And next week, what we're going to talk about is, of course, we'll do a little recap, and we'll talk about the Deadly Years, where the Enterprise gets attacked by about 10 Romulan birds of prey. We'll talk about Journey to Babel, where the Enterprise gets sabotaged and engages in a battle with essentially an Orion pirate ship. And the Orion pirate ship has some unique characteristics to it that make it interesting. And then finally, we'll see another Commodore. This one doesn't die, but he never takes any. But he lives because he never makes any attempts to actually take over command of the Enterprise. So, and that's the ultimate computer, where the M5 takes over the Enterprise, and they engage in war games against Commodore Wesley and a group of 4 Constitution-class cruisers. So. And that's about all I have for tonight, and it is exactly 10 p.m. How about that? Let's see. Stop screen share.
As it turns out, if you unmute, you can be heard better.
Oh, so you unmuted. Hopefully I wasn't on unmute, or hopefully I wasn't muted for the last 40.
Oh, I haven't heard anything you've said for the last
What?
40
You've been
minutes.
talking? So, all right.
No, I was
Okay.
muted. So I've been trying to sort of research here the question of James T. Kirk's rank progression. Memory alpha doesn't have anything. Memory gamma. How many? I knew about memory.
Beta canon, which is like secondary sources. So gamma's got to be
people just making shit up.
What's that?
People just making shit up.
Someone's just making crap up.
It actually has a rank progression and has him serving on board a bunch of ships I've never heard of, including one where he had been promoted to commander and served as first officer. So I'm still unconvinced based upon what I remember from the making of Star Trek, which is as close to a canon source as you can get, because there's like a lot of the sourcing in making of Star Trek is studio memos. So like you end up with stuff that like was like series Bible type stuff, basically. But I haven't found out anything else that works, or anything definitive. So
yeah, let's see. Oh, you're welcome. Thanks. I hope you enjoy it. Hope everyone enjoyed it. Somebody said, I think we're going to feel cheated for you because you finished on time. Mr. Voigt.
Yeah, well, that happens every now and then. So, so when I was at the Naval War College, one of the professors, I did the faculty by day, student by night thing, which was the best possible way to get a master's degree. I mean, I literally walked across the pedestrian bridge to the building under which my car was parked in the underground parking. And instead of going directly to my car, I stopped off in a classroom for 3 hours. That's how I got a master's degree.
Yeah.
But in any event, I was talking to the one professor, and he said the class was about 2 hours and 45 minutes long. And he said they used to list it as being a 2.5 hour class. And people would always complain in the end of year forums about how the class always ran late. And so they changed it officially to a 3 hour class, and they got all these glowing reports about how class always finished early.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about expectations are more important than reality.
And along those lines, there was something they had opened, some company had opened this new building that had a tall building with elevators. And there were all these complaints about the elevators being too slow. The wait for the elevators was too slow. And so they talked to the engineers, and the engineers are doing all this stuff about trying to make the elevators go faster and make them more responsive, et cetera, et cetera. And they talked with somebody else. I forget exactly what his job title was, but they talked to this other consultant, and he goes, "Why do people think the elevators are too slow?" And when they pulled the thread, it's like people were getting bored waiting, so they just put up stuff for them to read in the elevator lobby, and the problem went away. It's like TV screens would show the news or something, and the problem went away.
Yep. That's good. Distraction. It's an important part of warfare.
So Alec is, last I heard, he's still waiting for them to finish doing the install, which is why he wasn't here this week. So he still doesn't have internet connectivity worth a damn. But that will come at some point. Also, so Pat's gonna. Your plan is to do this again next week, right? Are you available next week?
Yeah. Yes, I believe I'm available next week.
You've got your schedule. You know you're not flying.
Yeah, I know my schedule in December, so I don't start flying again until the 9th.
Oh, so, yeah. Okay.
And I think in most cases I'm even back in the hotel before in time, so it should be okay.
Yeah, okay, because there's a crew rest thing.
Yeah.
You have to deal with.
There's the whole thing.
Yeah, but and the plan going forward is I will be prepared in case Pat seems to have a remarkable ability to find places that don't actually have internet connectivity, despite the fact they claim they do.
Yeah, that's called a hotel. They're usually pretty bad. I think it just depends on where you are in the hotel, whether you can get a good signal or not. So,
Yeah.
So I'm not likely to do this from the lobby.
And I still have chambered and ready to fire a reasonably extensive discussion about Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda and sort of how fleet organization works in that show. And I also need to do a little bit on the glossary of naval ship types because that'll tie in nicely with that. And so we got plenty of things on the schedule for future episodes. Absolutely.
So, all right, cool. Well, I guess it's a good time to wrap it up. I think Alyssa would probably like to call it a night as well. So,
all right, that sounds
good,
good.
everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving to everybody.
Yes.
See you all next week.
Have a happy and safe Thanksgiving to everybody. Bye now.